Okay.
So you want to kind of go over what we talked about in terms of what we were funded for, in what years, and what we can expect again of the Commonwealth to potentially come back for, and maybe what you've learned since our last meeting?
Yeah, there really isn't much change in the picture since we last talked about it, but I can at least refresh what the story is. For years, Renova was spending more than the available funding. So when you had low occupancy, the occupancy adjustment or reduction at time of audit did not hurt Renova because it was a reduction to the costs that were already in excess of your available funding. So you had already lost the money that you spent over budget. What's different now in the last couple years is we've increased your funding level from the state. So now when that reduction comes into play at time of audit, it will truly be a loss of funding. There will be a disallowance that will hurt. So in 15-16, well, in 14-15, you had a $500,000 loss because costs exceeded your funding. So when the occupancy adjustment rolls in for that year, it's not going to be anything additional. You already lost the $550,000 that year. In 15-16, we brought the funding level up to cover all of your costs, but the occupancy adjustment will be coming in at some point when the state gets caught up on their audits, and they are quite a few years behind. I don't know if any of us will be still sitting around the table when they finally get here, but your 15-16 hit will be $77,000, and that was, not only was that my calculation, but that was further supported by RKL when they did your AUP document for 15-16, and I have a copy of that with me as well. In 16-17, my estimate is that you'll lose $92,000 for the low occupancy. So in 16-17, we decided to play a long shot, and we submitted a letter to the state with the cost report requesting a waiver of that regulation that requires that you meet 98%. Typically, Renova would not qualify for such a waiver because you are more than 16 beds, and the other criterion would be to increase or decrease your certified capacity. You didn't meet any of those requirements in 16-17. But we asked ODP to waive the regulation anyway so that you don't get hit with the $92,000 loss. They are considering it. There was a couple emails that went back and forth. I don't have a final answer yet, but they are considering it. And they more or less accepted our explanation that you had a lot of unusual things going on during that fiscal year. You were indeed admitting new residents, but you kept losing residents at the same time. And they seemed to agree that these were extenuating circumstances, that you're making the effort to meet the occupancy. So we're still keeping our fingers crossed that you won't lose the $92,000. So now, and again, in 16-17, by the way, your costs were fully covered. The funding level was enough to cover all costs, except for this $92,000. 17-18, the year that we're halfway through already, we don't have your funding level for this year yet, but I am able to calculate minimum and maximum, minimum being what the standard methodology allows, maximum being that standard funding level plus everything that we ask for, and your current cost projections are right in that ballpark. So it looks very good that we will have all costs covered again in 17-18. In order to avoid the occupancy loss, the suggestion I made a while back, and what we're talking about here today, is changing the number of certified beds at Renova, because that's one of those criterion to be permitted to have the regulation waived. So if you decrease your certified beds, that's one of those regulatory items that ODP would most certainly, and I can't promise what they would do, but I would expect that they would approve a waiver in 17-18. And then from there, the question, and you're going to continue to lose, you know, amounts in the $90,000 to $100,000 range per year. So if you reduce your certified beds, we think we can avoid that problem. And I guess the question is how many beds would you reduce and what the process is. The process is a simple one, and it's basically Renova sending a letter to the Department of Health, copying the Office of Development Programs, and just saying that you want to reduce the number of certified beds. They're likely to approve it. Then you meet that regulatory requirement. We would follow up with a reduction to your funding level to show a reduction in beds, but that reduction would be very small, and the net result would be your rate would actually go up. I know that when we talked about it early on, one of the questions that you raised was, if we reduce our beds, can we add those beds back again at a later date? And my answer was that you could always ask, but there's never any guaranteed results for that. I did follow up on that, and I now have an email chain from Steve Evetts in the Bureau of Financial Management at ODP, and he does say yes, an increase of 10% is allowed without ODP approval. So 10% for you would be 2 beds. So even now, if you were filled and had a need to increase your certified capacity, you could ask for 2 more beds, or you could add 2 more beds to your facility. Just because I have it written in an email, again, a few years down the road, who knows what they'll say, you know. You know, they could say, well, the former ODP management, you know. So there's never any guarantees. But, so I guess that's the decision for you. In order to avoid a large financial loss, do you want to change the number of certified beds at your facility?
And can you tell us again, ADP stands for?
ODP is Office of Developmental Programs.
Thank you.
Within the Department of Human Services. It used to be the Office of Mental Retardation, and then they changed their name.
Are you recommending a number?
The number of beds, conservatively, 1. If you want to do more, you certainly could. I don't see a huge advantage to doing more than 1. If you reduce your beds, like I said, we would follow up with a reduction to your funding level based on the number of beds. Usually 1 or 2 doesn't involve many costs. We would probably calculate day program costs as the most major expense. We'd reduce a very small amount of food and clothing and service supplies. It would be a very small reduction, but then the rate would go up, because the rate is always divided by the number of days based on the number of beds. So since your days would go down, the rate would go up. If you would get into reducing 3 or 4 or 5 beds, then the department would likely look for reductions in staffing, and the reductions would be more significant. But if you want to be very, take a conservative approach,
So
1 bed, maybe 2.
Based on that statement, then we're staffing to the number of licensed beds, not occupied beds.
Your actual, I don't know that I can speak to exactly what you're staffing to, but
In other words, if we drop to 22 or 21, you're saying the staffing would change, but really those beds are empty anyway.
they're empty anyway. Then we would have to justify to ODP why we would not want to reduce the staffing,
Right, okay.
like you're already reduced. So I
Okay,
could say,
I just wanted to
yeah.
be.
So there's a tolerance for what might be considered an overstaffing if your objective is still to fill those beds. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Well, it's not that you're overstaffed. It's more.
I said perceived overstaffing or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, ODP is more in a place where if you're serving fewer beds, we expect a reduction in your funding level. They feel that your funding level is based on the number of certified beds. Could we argue that? Could we take numbers in your cost reports and say that's normally the way it is, but in this instance it really isn't? In this instance, it's really based on our cost report that was serving 21 beds. We could argue that and, you know, try to prove otherwise. It's just the logic that they usually go through from their side of the desk. You know, they're not out here on this side.
So the bottom line is you're recommending it that we decertify one bed at this point.
I think so. I think that's a real safe route to go, unless there's some preference to do more. You could do more, but I think one would get us out of the situation where we're going to lose the occupancy adjustment.
Okay, and I do have a follow-up question, if I may. You mentioned that we could increase by two beds, which would be 10%, without anybody's approval. Is that 2% of what we currently have certified, or is that 2% of 25, or 2% of how many beds are filled?
Certified. 2% of your certified beds.
Okay, so and how often can that be changed? So in other words, if we drop to 24 beds and we add 2 later because we have demand, we're up to 26. What period of time would have to go by, if any, before we could add another 2?
I'm pretty sure, I'd have to look that up for you, I'm pretty sure it's every 2 years.
Every 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make a note to check that.
And Roman, you don't see any reason that filling these beds is going to change?
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, I'm always at have the notion that this is kind of cyclical, and I fear that at some point in time we're going to have an influx of Lebanon County residents that are going to want to need our facility. How you predict that, you know, I mean, we haven't had very many so far, you know, but they're out there. So that's, you know.
And the circumstances are always changing with parents getting older and
Yes.
those kinds of
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's going to come to that time, you know, where you're going to get an influx of a number of parents who are going to be seeking, you know, care for them, but you just don't, you don't know.
Do we
when
have
that-
a source of folks out there that would qualify for Renova but are presently under other care that are residents? Do we have a source for anything like that, or?
We get a lot of referrals from a lot of different agencies, and we look at all of them. And I would say 99% of them, they all have behavioral problems, you know, and we wouldn't be able to. Our facility is not equipped. Now, there are other ICF facilities who will accept them. Right. You know, that type of thing, but given our current population and what we can do, so, you know, those types of
Well, that would change the complexion.
yes, the whole thing would be totally changed.
I was looking at our staffing just before I came in, and it looks like we have 36 full-time people working at Renova Center and 7 part-timers, and then a cadre of casuals. So do we have like about that 36 full-time, is that 12 per shift, or how does that break down?
We probably have maybe 7, 8 per shift that we have, except for third shift, because they're all sleeping and stuff, so we have a minimum skeleton crew
Okay.
that exists on third shift, but it's first shift and second shift. Even though we have a number of individuals that go to day programming and that kind of stuff, during the day we have so many appointments that people need to go to, you know, so we need individuals, staff, to go with them. So that takes care of that. And then second shift, they're all home.
Okay, and you're
you
talking
know.
nursing staff basically, then plus your administration during the day, your administrative staff.
Nursing, administration, and DAs,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, when I look around, we're busy. I mean, you know, with the staffing, with the people and the hospitalizations and appointments and outings that we take them to. I mean, it's very, very busy, you know.
Yeah,
during the
I know
day.
it, and I think you guys do a stellar job.
Yeah.
I've been a big supporter for a long time.
Yeah, you have.
But I just wanted to put things in perspective for people who may not know what it takes to operate Renova Center.
I'm good with one.
Yeah, I'm
Try
fine.
for one.
Would we take formal action, or we can just do this here to make this decision?
No, you're not in a meeting to take action.
No, but I know that.
Oh, yes, you mean at your next,
Yeah.
at your next or whichever meeting works, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the decertification would be something to come up to a regular meeting and, you know,
Yeah.
whatever notice needs to be provided. I don't know if there's wording, you know, certain wording that needs to be given to the Department of Human Services or.
I think it's a letter from what they've told me, and it is kind of hard getting the information out of them, but it's a letter from you to the Department of Health, either Orlando or somebody else that you
A
deal
letter
with.
from
From the Renova Center requesting.
Renova or from the commissioners?
No, I think from Roman saying that the county commissioners have taken action,
Right.
right?
It's typically from the administrator.
But, I mean, you're my supervisors here, being county government, so, you know.
However you guys think it's best, yeah.
Make the decision.
Three? Said yes to that, or?
Yeah, I think, did you agree to that, or you in
Well, the
agreement?
vote's only gonna be,
No, well,
I mean, we'll just,
I don't want to be set up for a room full of people being upset that we're decertifying a bed. If that's what it's going to lead to, I would not support it. So I just want to hear where we are as commissioners. Are we all in favor of this, or is this going to be a split vote situation? That's what I'm sort of inquiring about.
not sure what the answer is.
Yeah. I was reading one of the emails, Mary Ann, that you said that
Not commit to.
that you were suggesting one for this year and another one for next year. To put that, is that,
Well, I would say one now, and then maybe consider it again next year. If you're in the same boat, facing a large disallowance for the following year, maybe just taking it one bed at a time in order to avoid the financial loss. I mean, you're up in the $100,000 range. That's a lot of money. It's not 5,000. You know, it's a lot of money. So if you do one at a time, it kind of spreads it out and it keeps you qualified for that regulation. That was the only reason I
Yeah.
thought that.
I was just thinking, you come one year and you ask for it, the next year you come and you're asking for another one. I don't know how that sits or how that works or whatever. I was just bringing that up as a,
So we could,
Talking
I
point.
mean, you could do this at the next meeting if we have enough, information to do so. It doesn't sound like it's a very formal process other than notification.
Right. I was writing with. I had contacted ODP. They said that you contact Department of Health. I was trying to find out exactly the person I was writing with, Orlando Hernandez, which you know.
Yeah. and our only contact with DOH is the surveyors. I'm not quite sure if they're equipped, you know, to do it, so we'll have to find.
Yeah, he said, when it comes to bed decreases of certified capacity for an ICFID, providers need to submit the following documents to the field office in our division that regulates the specific facility. A letter requesting the decrease, a bed complement reflecting the current capacity, a bed complement with the proposed decrease in capacity. I was confused about what a bed complement means. Is that a document? I think it's a description that you might have on file that shows how many people you have in how many bedrooms, that type of thing. I think that's what he's looking for. It is important to mention that a request to decrease capacity cannot be made retroactive. The field office will send you an acknowledgement letter and will process the request to the respective offices that need to be notified it is a pretty straightforward process. And that's really all he wants.
Okay,
And I think that it is as simple as that.
okay. Well, then, if I can get it set up for the 18th, if you want to have Roman in.
I won't be supporting it unless it's unanimous. I won't do it under a split vote.
We'll get it scheduled.
Okay.
Okay?
But we appreciate all your work in trying to save us
Yes.
the money and keep us in a good place with the finances down there, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
And it's not always about the money. I mean,
No,
frequently is, but
But
you're
this is
right
not
to
hurting
think of
any
other
quality of
things.
care, or it's not impacting on any of our residents, so I.
Or employees, really, so
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
It's
yeah.
all good, but this has gotten me off the concern about out-of-county folks that we're holding beds for and that kind of thing, because now we're not subsidizing to the extent that we were. But I don't want to do anything with the bed count that is going to have a room full of people saying we're being insensitive and we're going to, I've been through that before, and I don't want to, that's why, unless it's a unanimous vote to do that, I don't want to be in that position with the public. So that's my only caveat.